Board of Finance on Tuesday, August 28th. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we begin, Diane, I would just like to give a public welcome and a warm welcome to our newest member of the Board of Finance, Nick Jones. Am I saying it? You prefer Nick or Nicholas?
Nick is fine.
Nick, thank you. Welcome to the board.
Thank you.
Okay, agenda item 2, public participation.
Good evening.
Good evening, Sean Rest, 53 Lancaster Road. I just wanted to introduce a piece of, I think, valuable information to the board. It's an examination of the State of Vermont Tax-Incremental Financing Program, which was prepared by the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. And I understand this is pertaining to Vermont's TIF legislation, and I know we're going to see and hear a lot of great things about what TIF can do. But I would like to, I think the public's entitled to a little bit of information about what the risks are. And before I forget, I think it's really important that we have a cost-benefit analysis for such a program if we're going to have that, because the public's entitled, if they're going to take on risk for any kind of development, they're entitled to know what they're going to get for benefit from that, and a cost-benefit analysis would do that. So I'm just going to read just a couple paragraphs, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. It says, legislators need to be mindful that TIF involves considerable uncertainty. The success of a TIF district relies on events in the future, namely its ability to spur new investment, generate future property value growth, and incremental tax revenues. The scale of infrastructure improvements a municipality can undertake is dependent on the amount of debt it can afford, which in turn dependent on the amount of future tax-incremental financing a district could generate. Basing any development or policy decisions on future events is inherently risky. TIF is no different. TIF districts could be subject to upside opportunities if the amount of development exceeds what was expected. Then excess tax increments present a windfall to the municipality, but not necessarily the state. It could use it to pay off the debt sooner. Is that what Bristol is going to do? I'm very interested to find out if this is just going to be a 30-year revolving debt fund that taxpayers are going to be on the hook for. Or are we going to pay everything off within that 30-year time, or is there some kind of structure as to where it's going to be paid off? Back to the document. Furthermore, unexpected development could create new economic activity, provide other benefits to a municipality such as higher wages, higher employment. That would all be contained in a cost-benefit analysis, I'm assuming. Establishing a TIF district may also draw in other types of funding, such as state loans and grants. Are there any state loans or grants that are expected to be going into the TIF fund? Taxpayers need to know that before we adopt something that they don't know anything about. Also, TIF involves downside risk and fiscal consequences. The main downside risk is that future property value growth and tax increments fall short of the projections. If the municipalities incur debt against these tax incremental projections, it could put significant fiscal pressure on the municipality. If a municipality is unable to repay debt obligations because of missed tax incremental projections, the state may be forced to extend the increment retention period. This applies to Vermont, but the situation can apply to Bristol. And I just want to give this to the chair, and I'd like to also email you the link to the actual report from the state of Vermont.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you.
Any other members from the public?
Agenda item 3, consent agenda, items A through H.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda, recommend approval of this action for joint meeting with City Council and Board of Finance.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, please.
Agenda item 4, Board of Education, budget update.
Good evening. I put together a presentation for you, and I did print out some copies. Thank you. I did print out some copies in case you want to take some notes for questions during or after.
Thank you. Do you need another one down there? Okay.
This presentation will follow the update that we provide you with each month. You'll see a lot of these numbers repeated in what I'm going to share with you this evening, and I think that this will sort of bring everything to light and make a lot of sense at the end. We had done this presentation for our Board of Education. Commissioner Calfee attended and thought that this would be very beneficial for this group as well. So in each one of the Board of Education characters, I've described what we pay out of that line that you see on your financial summary, and I can also go over where we've managed to come up with some savings during the year. So the first line is general control, and what gets paid out of general control are basically expenditures that have to do with the superintendent's office. So that includes the salaries throughout the administrative central offices, our supplies, our printing, our phones, rents, postage machines, our membership, and our travel. And where we have had considerable savings in the 17-18 school year in supplies, we saved about $34,000. Our memberships, about $12,000. Postage, we were very careful, saved $33,000, and in staff transport, about $15,000. And you can see that in our available budget line, at the end of the year, we had a little over $92,000 to put toward our deficit. In the instruction line, by and large, this is our biggest chunk, you want to think of that, of the budget. Principal salaries are paid out of this area, also teacher salaries, substitutes, paraprofessionals, secretaries, or interns, and then our instructional supplies, textbooks, rents and leases, printing, binding, and memberships for staff. Without a doubt, where we saved the most money was our instructional supplies. When we put the hard freeze into effect shortly after I got here, we had an available $287,000 in our instructional supply line. Also, our office secretaries stopped their ordering for anything that didn't directly support curriculum, and we were able to save $62,000. And you'll see that in the detail that's behind the financial summary that I give you if you are curious as we go along. Transportation, we fell short by about $109,000. We discussed this at length earlier in the year. If you recall, the amount for buses, $343.01 per bus per day, was not budgeted properly to start with, and so we finished transportation overall in a deficit. This is not special education transportation, this is regular education transportation. In operation of plant, what gets paid out of this section of the budget are custodial salaries and their overtime for the winter that wouldn't end. All that plowing we had to do, our secretaries that are associated with custodial services, and then our electricity, heating, fuels, repair maintenance, property and liability insurance, and custodial supplies and equipment. Where we were able to save here, our electricity line was $93,000 under budget, which is a considerable savings, in part to some of the LED lighting projects that we did on the exterior of our buildings, and also in part just to turning off computer monitors and so forth at night and just really tightening up the belt. Natural gas was under budget by $74,000, however, heating oil was over budget by $89,000, so you'll see us budget a little more accurately in the future.
Sure.
Also, yes?
Before you go on over here, Back to transportation real quick, the
Sure.
343.01 per bus per day.
Last year was 343.01.
What is it
per
this
day.
coming year? What's our increase? Roughly 3%? 3%?
Thank you.
And we're running the same amount of buses?
Well, we'll know that when school starts,
Wow.
we'll find out if the routes are more full than we are thinking, or less full.
Thank you.
Moving on to maintenance of plant. What is paid out of maintenance of plant are the salaries for our maintenance personnel, half a secretary there, repairs and maintenance, the field maintenance, and then taking care of our buildings. Our savings here, we had some salary savings, we had some workers' comp issues in this area. Professional services, we did not need as much as budgeted, so that was great. We had about $53,000 in savings there. Field maintenance, we did not expend a little over $63,000, and then supplies and maintenance, we hung on to $70,000. We were over budget in overtime and repairs. If you remember the broken pipes that happened during the winter, we were $136,000 over the line in repairs. However, in this character, we were finished with about $106,000. Moving on to benefits. This is the section where our medical, dental, life, workers' comp, pension, Social Security, and Medicare, and severance, very small amount for education reimbursement and unemployment insurance. By far, the savings here were in unemployment compensation, or insurance rather. We had little exposure there, and we had a little bit left in the budget for Social Security and pension. $89,000 we did not expend. I believe that's because we paid it earlier, right? Yep, we saved money by paying that up front. We did, however, go over budget quite a bit in severance. However, those retirements create future savings. So when we have 29 retirements, I think?
25 and plus
25, and some resignations, so we had quite a bit of movement there. In Character 7, that's athletics and student activities. The AD salary and our coaching stipends are paid out of there. They also have a half-time salary that is split for secretary. Field trips are athletic officials and athletic supplies, and then student recognitions, printing, equipment, CIC membership, and so forth. Here we had a savings of a little over $106,000 again. Mostly, the biggest line here was coaches. Coaches was over budgeted, and that has been addressed and fixed in our 18-19 budget. Student recognition, supplies, and equipment all had a savings as well. Capital and technology had a huge savings. They really responded to the freeze, and they were also very creative in their purchasing. We chose less expensive desktop models for our leases, and that saved us $171,000. We did not replace a video server, so in the schools that have the scrolling announcements, we put that off until this year and budgeted for that this year. We did not put a WebEx service in, so we saved $25,000 there. And then some software licensing, we were pretty creative. There's a program called Destiny, which does library management, textbook management, and equipment management. And we contacted that company because we're not using that for equipment management. And that saved us almost $50,000. So we've really taken a look and gotten very creative. And I also want to give a little shout out to the people in our tech department because they communicate excellent with me. They had their purchase orders closed first. They were right on the money, and they're just really great. And then our special education budget, when I first arrived in Bristol, we were expecting a $1.6 million deficit, and we were expecting a whole lot more than what we received in excess cost funding. We finished the year with a $1.396 million deficit. And in special education, this pays for our supervisor salaries, all of our special education teachers, our psychologists, our speech clinicians, occupational and physical therapists. There are several secretaries and paraprofessionals in this line, and professional services as well.
Jill, does this include, the deficit includes the amount. We weren't reimbursed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Then on the right, those are our bigger ticket items.
That's prior year.
Can I just ask clarification? Cheryl, are you talking about the 501?
Yeah.
No, that's not incorporated in these.
Okay.
I thought you were asking about excess cost funding that was applied to all of these expenditures, so
No.
two different things.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
On the right-hand side are our larger ticket items, transportation and outplaced tuition. That takes up the bulk of the special education budget, and they also have special supplies and equipment. Special education also put a halt wherever they could with their supplies for office and students, if possible. As far as the revenues that we took in, these are our totals for rental, tuition, Medicaid, and excess costs. Rentals were just under $80,000. Our tuition's a little higher than last year, $165,000. Medicaid was much higher than we expected, and excess cost was a little bit lower than expected. Here's how that appears to what came in last year. A little bit higher in rentals and tuitions, quite a bit higher in Medicaid, a little bit lower in excess cost. All in all, we took a little more than $55,000 more in revenue than in fiscal year 17. This is what we estimate we saved from our hard freeze on the budget. In instructional supplies throughout, so when you go through all of those pages that we supply you with, for instructional supplies throughout all our department, $517,000 showed as available, and we could put that toward our budget deficit. Office supplies, $115,000. Custodial and maintenance together, $157,000, and equipment, $225,000, for a total of $1,016,312. So our bottom line, our budget, as you know, was $110,361,655. Sorry, $110 million. Just a little difference there. $361,655, but we expended $110,770,027. So that leaves us a difference of $408,372. This is slightly different from our Board of Education presentation because at the 13th hour we had one more small tuition refund come in for $4,131, which we put toward last year. There were three significant items that happened at the 13th hour. Our last Medicaid check came in, and we had $116,654 more in Medicaid this year than last year. We do have a different vendor CompuClaim who processes that for us, so it could be in part to that. But my forecast, I was just looking at what Medicaid was last year. So that was an extra $116,000 come in. Also, we had refunded tuition a little over $136,000. That was from several different placements. One of them, the Wheeler Clinic, we pay that entire tuition at the beginning of the year, and some students did not complete the year, so over $90,000 came back from that vendor. And then when we encumbered our salaries, we had some no-pay situations, whether those teachers left the district, and then because of our hiring freeze, we put a substitute in place. Those salaries were never unencumbered. We might have had a couple of leaves there that were no-pay situations, like a maternity leave that was extended. So when we unencumbered those salaries, we had about $234,000 come back into play. So our goal is to get a better handle on all of those things, but most importantly, the tuition and the salaries. Those are things that we can keep an eye on. So Dr. Dieter's team and my team will meet frequently throughout the year so that we make sure that we are communicating to each other about students that may have left, and we can account for that throughout the year rather than getting surprised at the end, and the salaries as well. I guess the good news is we're always going to be surprised in the right direction, the way we're handling the budget, but that altered our forecast by over $486,000. When we last got together, we felt that our deficit had just dipped under the $1 million mark, And so that's why there's such a disparity in those numbers. The rest of the good news is that we have been in touch with the state. They did send us a communication, didn't they, stating that we will be receiving $264,375 in displaced student grant money. Those are students that suffered from Puerto Rico and surrounding islands in the storms. That brings our total end-of-year figure to a deficit of $143,997, which is within 0.13% of our original budget allocation. So, although I'd rather be in the other direction, that's still a really good number, and we're really proud that we were able to cut down on our spending and help the city out. As my last slide, happy to take any of your questions.
Any questions for Jill? That was a very nice presentation. Well laid out. Thank you. I got one after that.
And one more piece of good news.
Keep it coming. We're okay. Good news is good.
There's nothing really to speak of in transfers, so I'll just gloss over that. We had a few last-minute transfers in special education into professional services. The board did vote to transfer $104,000 to pay subs from one subline to the other. But the cafeteria, where we had projected a deficit all year long, has come in the black. We had projected a deficit of over $60,000 last time we spoke. We've ended up $35,140 to the good. Our cash income sales was $32,000 higher than it was last year with less students. That just went through the roof at the end of the year. Our federal reimbursements were $66,000 higher than last year and what was projected, and then our state money was $23,000 higher than last year. So those are all good things that were not forecast. And if you remember, those federal reimbursements lag a couple of months behind, so we had a very hard time projecting that. But wonderful news, both in the right direction. Dr. Moreau?
And you have more good news for us too, right, Sue?
I'm really proud of our staff being able to tighten the belt and do the right thing and make sure that we had as small a deficit as possible.
I think it's great. Wonderful job. Thank you.
I would also like you to consider having us make quarterly reports instead of monthly reports to the Board of Finance, because often we're giving you the same information over and over again. Diane and Jill communicate probably almost every day. And so if there was an issue, we would certainly be alerting. I forward every letter I get from the state to Diane to make sure that she has that information as soon as I receive it.
Oh, I'm going to put that to the board. Thoughts on that? Anybody want to venture in on some? Ron?
Just from my experience working the last 2 to 3 years, I would say that the relationship between the Finance Board and the Board of Education is much, much better.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot less need for real detailed scrutiny, and I would be more than willing to give that an opportunity and a try.
Marie, I saw you reach for the microphone.
Yep, I would agree with that, but I do have one quick question on special education, because I was looking at the very last item. And since I'm new to the format on this, I did have some questions about this format, first time I saw it in June. I see that it says in September 1st of 2017, we had 1,533 special ed enrolled
Dr.
students.
Dieter is here and he'll be able to respond.
Okay, terrific. And then as of August 1st, which I assume is this August 1st, 2018, almost a year later, that has gone up to 1,604. But as I recall, there was quite an influx of students during the 17-18 education year. Is that correct? So 1,604, is that an increase over what was presented in June? I forget what that number was.
I provided both data points so you could have a comparison year
Right, from one year to the next.
And we
right.
will certainly provide an update for September 1, so you have September 1 to September 1 numbers. That increase, those are the numbers. Those are the students that are currently enrolled. What I always try to stress to the board here is that our numbers are accurate on that day and valid on that day. There is a lot of transients among students in and out of Bristol, and the numbers, they account for where we sit in that moment, but there is movement over the course of the week and month and over the course of the year. We've worked very hard with that number, with the increased enrollment. You'll also see that enrollment in our in-district programs has grown significantly, and that is a significant cost savings that we have gladly engaged in because we want our students here in district. We've built robust programs. We're proud of the programs and the services that we offer, and I think if you look at the numbers there, you'll see that there's a significant
Yeah, the numbers are
increase there
remarkable,
as well.
107 to 206.
Yes.
So I fully support having the Board of Education report in on a quarterly basis, but I would just ask that should there ever be a spike in any category, that you not feel that we are not here to listen and to learn and to act on what's necessary. Because I'm sure our controller will help manage.
I remind everybody that we're all given notice of when the Board of Ed finance meetings are, as well as their regular meetings, and everybody's free to attend those or even look at the reports. So they're also available, and I agree. I think great strides have happened. I'll get to you one second. Let me finish. I think going quarterly, but if we run into the problem we're starting to head to a deficit, then we just have to sit back down again, but I think that's good. So I had two hands over here, and then I've got this side of the room. So I'll start with John and then Orlando.
I still have some concerns. So I will go with quarterly, but I'll just carry one more further than Marie, and I would like something in writing every month, something short, the number of special ed students placed, the number of, just so we have some raw data relative to special ed on a monthly basis.
Does the current format that we've been reporting work for you? Because those are numbers that we are continuing to generate.
And you're giving those to Diane every month, right?
And I'll catch up with you again, because I think you save some money in places where you ought not to save it, frankly. But
well, I wanted to make a comment about that. Some of these savings are one-time only. You can only starve the supply closet just so much, and then you end up with a program that's deteriorating, and we don't want to see that. So we asked people to find all those cubby holes that they were hiding the boxes of tissues in this year. But again, we can't put that off forever. In terms of the numbers, Mr. Lamont had talked about creating programs in the district to bring kids back from outplacement. So when you see those numbers of students from outplaced to in-district change, it's as a result of Mike and his team being able to create programs, least restrictive environment, best learning opportunity for children. They need to be outplaced. That is where they will go eventually. But right now, our programs are very robust in district.
yeah, my concern is not that there's so much. I also understand the education side perhaps as much as anybody here. I also understand the other side. You folks are in charge of the majority of assets of the city. And the buildings need attention. And I think you really need to pay homage to that in this coming budget, because as those assets decrease, at some point, the lack of expenditure there catches up with us, and that costs big dollars.
John, I thought you were talking about the children's assets, because that also is true.
But I'm worried about the physical assets, Marie, as well as the other side.
When we present the next year's budget, we'll be very clear about our needs once again. And Pete Fusco knows what needs to happen. He knows what's going on in our buildings. We make some asks we don't get. So we have to weigh that. What is the happy medium between what we need and what the ability of the city to pay for those things?
Well, yeah, at some point, I think, I want to hear from there, but your operations committee ought to take a tour of every building, inside and out. Enough said.
We've been looking around, and some things have been taken care of in the last couple of days.
Orlando.
First of all, I do want to say thank you for the presentation and for the format of the presentation. I think it was clear and concise and everyone could follow along. For the quarterly reports, I just want to tie you down with some dates. So our fiscal year is July to June. So the first quarter report would be October if you do July, August, and September. So are we doing a
Fiscal
October?
quarterly, yes.
Okay, so my concern is, we do in October, we do in January, we do in April. And in between the January and April, you do your workshops, and then we do the budgets, and so I'm just worried about the overlap in the timing of the April quarterly compared to what you're going to present that close to the end of the year, along with the final report, which is going to be July, and we've already ended the school year. So I really need to
We
address
would be very
quarters 3 and
happy
4.
to come and present whenever the Board of Finance would like us to. But my point was that monthly was more than I think was necessary. And, you know, let's look to where we came from, folks. 2.4 million deficit 2 years in a row. And we've come in with just over 100,000. That's a lot of work on the part of our staff to get things that clean. Because we really thought up until 2 months ago we were still at 1.1 million. So we're pretty vigilant, and we definitely want to communicate, and I do believe that we do communicate with the Comptroller's office. Tell me the dates and we'll be here.
So Orlando, if they come in at the end of April, so I would suggest that the controller perhaps take a look at what the legislative agenda and calendar is for next year, because probably the most important thing to all of us is how the state is going to treat Board of Education expenses. So if they need to come in February or March because of a public hearing, or don't need to, and April is sufficient, I'm trying to remember now, next year is a
Biennial.
is the start of a biennial budget, so it's going to be a very important year legislatively. So I think we need to keep that in mind, and perhaps with the chair work on a calendar.
Well, we can start with target dates and then modify as necessary, but I think staying with the fiscal year quarterly
It's easy.
works, and we recognize the budget will also be in there. I think it, you know, again, if we start to go down a path, we just increase the amount of time we get together. But it's a good starting block. So, this side of the room, any comments, questions, concerns?
Comment. I will say that I'm impressed about the detail and the accuracy, you know, like I will echo what Ron said compared to a few years back. I'm very pleased, and I was, like Ron and John Smith said, maybe a memo every month, and every 3 months I'm for it.
Very good.
Great. Any other questions for Sue, Jill, Dr. Dieter, and Kate? Thank you. Okay. I
Thank you.
believe we have a motion, right? Is that, let me just sort of...
So you have agenda item 4B for Board of Education, which is transfer $415,000 from the general fund contingency account.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to transfer $415,000 from the general fund contingency account to the Board of Education operating budget for cost overruns as of June 30th, 2018, and to recommend approval of this action to the joint meeting of the City Council and the Board of Finance. Second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion. And we're confident the check for the displaced students will come onto the city side, correct?
Yes, we can do it that way.
Okay, because that is part of the offset. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Agenda item 5, various transfers totaling $1,162,718 within the general fund to close out fiscal year 2017-2018.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve a transfer totaling $1,162,718 within the general fund to close out fiscal year 17-18, and recommend approval of this action to the joint meeting of the City Council and the Board of Finance.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Agenda item 5, various 5B, carryovers totaling $3,990,794 within the general fund from fiscal year 2017, 2018 to fiscal year 2018, 2019.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve carryovers from fiscal year 2017-2018 to fiscal year 2018-2019 totaling $3,990,794 within the general fund and recommend approval of this action to a joint meeting of the City Council and Board of Finance.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Agenda item 5 areas, 5C, Bristol Development Authority, carryovers totaling $5,490 within the Community Development Block Grant Fund from fiscal year 2017, 2018 to fiscal year 2018, 2019.
Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to approve carryovers fiscal year 2017-2018 to the next fiscal year 2018-2019 totaling $5,490 within the Community Development Block Grant Fund and to recommend approval of this action to a joint meeting of the City Council and Board of Finance.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Agenda item 5D, various for the water pollution control, carryovers totaling $469,838 within the Sewer Operating and Assessment Fund from fiscal year 2017, 2018 to fiscal year 2018, 2019.
Make a motion to approve carryovers for fiscal year 2017-18 to fiscal year 2018-19 totaling $469,838 within the Sewer Operating and Assessment Fund and recommend approval of this action to a joint meeting of the City Council and Board of Finance.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Implementing tax increment financing TIF plan.
Justin, you're up. As you know, Justin's attached a 63-page presentation.
Oh my goodness. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I wasn't sure how to structure this, but I'll do my best. We'll talk a little bit about TIF and then sort of what your options or what the options of the City Council are as policymakers, sort of where the BDA as a board is coming from. TIF. So TIF is not a new economic development tool. TIF has been around for years. TIF is used, I want to say, in 48 states across the country. It's actually been around in Connecticut too for many years, but just about 3 years ago the statute was updated to make TIF a lot more user-friendly for communities. Historically, TIF was very sort of state-driven and state-mandated. So in other words, in order to establish a TIF master plan, communities, there was a lot of red tape and a lot of approvals required from the state. And then even if you were able to do that, as the community sort of went along and looked to utilize TIF for projects, state oversight was very heavy, right? And local control was nowhere to be found. So with TIF, local control is important because, as we've talked about, we're never obligated, right, to utilize TIF and to do a TIF project. We want to make sure it's the right project, right? So that's where local comes in. So within the master plan are sort of various steps along the way that if staff believe the TIF project makes sense, we're going to need approvals. So that local piece is important. So it was updated about 3 years ago, and communities, my counterparts, I don't get out enough as I should to learn from my counterparts, but I do once in a while. And my counterparts across the state took notice, and we all start sort of learning what is TIF, right? Does it work? First and foremost, one of my hats that I wear obviously is economic development director, I guess. And an area of the community that's important to me is downtown, right? That's an area that I consider is not playing on a level playing field from a development perspective. So that TIF piqued my interest there as maybe a way, yet another sort of program to prop up downtown. Brought it in front of, the administration and my board at the time. They sort of said, you know what, that makes sense. Why don't you investigate that a little further? And here we are. So what is TIF, essentially? It's really hard to wrap your head around TIF immediately, but essentially what TIF does is first you establish a district. You find a place in the community that you think could benefit from this incentive, right, to encourage development, in other words. So we obviously, again, looked at downtown. What happens is that you set a baseline for the property value, right, within that district, right? So I think the master plan indicates there's a property value, the baseline right now is about $140 million for real property within the TIF district. So as those property values rise, right, over the course of just the normal sort of city valuation process, the assessor's office and the tax collector handle. As that property values rise, there are taxes associated with that rise in value, right? So those taxes associated with the rise in value are sort of earmarked and put into several accounts that are used for certain purposes, right? So in this example, that $140 million valuation, that's always going to go into the general fund, right, as most tax revenue does. TIF is concerned just with the rise, right, what's above that. TIF is not a new tax. I should have said that up front. I always say that. TIF is not a new tax. TIF is not a special assessment on top of what's normally done through the assessor's office. TIF is just we're sort of carrying on the way we normally would with assessing property and accepting that tax revenue. But what we do with TIF is we take a percentage of that increase, we put it into accounts, and then we use those funds to fund projects within that district, right? So what does that mean? What can you do? So there's essentially two paths that you can take using TIF revenue, right? The city can fund projects within the district, right? So, and the list is long, right? So what does that mean? Streetscapes, utility work, roadways, construction, demolition, right? I mean, Center Square is always a good example to use. Center Square is going to need streetscapes. It's going to need utility work. As a matter of fact, it needs utility work now. We're working with Bristol Hospital to upgrade their gas line. TIF can also, from a city perspective in the future, if policymakers agree, fund incentive programs. If we want to sort of refund our facade program that was pretty successful downtown for many years, we can use TIF revenues to do that. So the city can use TIF revenues within the district. We can also work with private developers, again, if policymakers choose, to help them essentially put together financing for projects, right? So how does that work? So Mr. West made some good points in the master plan sort of addresses. You have to be very, very careful from a policy perspective and how you do this, right? So, but again, I use Center Square as examples because it's just so easy. If we had a developer that was looking at a residential development on Center Square, right? They want to build new residential housing. Maybe it's an apartment complex, because again, it's an easy example. So there's a cost associated with that, obviously. In most cases, that developer will approach a lending institution, right, and seek financing, sort of put together that capital stack. In Bristol, it can be difficult downtown. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, right? So the way a developer would approach a lending institution is he or she would say, my cost to build is this, right? And the lending institution would say, great, how are you going to service the debt? How are you going to achieve revenue on your project? Well, we're going to do X number of units at X amount. Let's say it's market rate project. We can expect to get X amount for my units for a year, right, in lease payments or rent payments. Oftentimes there's a gap there. The cost to build the debt cannot be serviced just by the revenue from the apartments. TIF could come in and maybe cover that gap, right? Because the way it would work is, with a private development, what's possible, again, policymakers would have to vet this stuff, but what's possible is a developer would pay the city what he or she is responsible for paying in real property tax revenue, and then he or she would receive a portion of that back, right, each year. And we can do it over the course of like 20 years. So what the developer then explains to the financial institution is, I can achieve X in rent payments, and I know that's not enough to cover debt, but guess what? I have a 20-year agreement with the city that I'm going to receive let's just say 75% of my real property taxes are coming back to me as a form of revenue each year, right? So sometimes that could cover that gap. That's one example of what a credit enhancement agreement could look like. They're not limited to that form, but that's sort of the most common and what's often explained the most when talking about TIF. So again, Mr. West makes really good points, and the study that he references it's absolutely true in that the municipality will have to be very careful on how it embarks on projects using TIF. And the idea of financing even a city project based on future tax revenue is always dicey, right? So there has to be stopgaps put in place for that sort of a thing. But you're not in the game if you don't have the master plan, right? And so we don't have the ability to look at that if we don't have the plan. It's a tool, and it's my job to find tools that may work. And again, for downtown, that's the area right now that's a focus for me, and I just wanted to create that level playing field. And for TIF, it seemed like a good fit. We won't know for sure until we have the ability to utilize it, and we just don't have that ability to look at TIF now. We have to be able to establish that master plan first. Just little notes, the downtown area was looked at for TIF. We're not limited to that. We have the ability, again, 5 years from now, who knows what will happen. There will be some area of the city where there's a development project that's in play that would be really valuable for the city, but TIF may help. We do have the ability to in the future, sort of expand the district to include other areas of the city. But that's kind of, it's hard to put TIF into a summary like that, but that's the basic concept of TIF. I guess I can answer any questions you have.
Questions for Justin?
I can try to answer it.
Okay, Marie.
I have a number of questions, and I am familiar with TIF. I am familiar with TIF. Bristol should be familiar with TIF because the sales tax TIF was used to help enhance lake compounds and actually keep lake compounds going as the oldest continuously operating amusement park in the United States. And that goes back quite a few years, and certainly before I was president of the Connecticut Development Authority, which is now part of Connecticut Innovations. So I do happen to have found, last minute before I left the house, a July 29th, 2015 memo that I will give to the committee and to the staff from a professional in the Connecticut Department of Revenue Services to a transportation finance panel. I'm not sure if that was a legislative panel or not, but it's a fairly good two-page summary of the 2015 legislation and the difference between what Justin just described to you, which is really a municipality being able to use its primary tax, property tax, for TIF financing, and having that really powerful tool, again, within policy parameters and certainly within financing and bond issuance parameters, in addition to what the state has been using for decades, which are the sales tax, admissions tax, cabaret tax, dues, and hotel taxes. What's fascinating to me about this new program, and I do have some questions for you, Justin, I'll save them for later. I don't want to inhibit other committee members from speaking out. But what I do want to question you about is the fact that the municipal TIF does allow some of that increased property tax value to come back to the city and actually be used for public purposes. So infrastructure, transportation, I think school buildings is allowed, and a whole variety of facilities that would really benefit us if we had the appropriate policy deliberations and consideration in place. So some of my questions, and if you'll just bear with me, I just have two quick questions maybe to start this, and that is, as a new member of the Board of Finance, I'm a little concerned about and don't know what the appropriate pathway is for even the discussion of this item to have come before our Board of Finance before there was a public hearing. Although I do understand that there was a March 2018 invitation to a meeting of the board of the Bristol Development Authority, and a couple of members of this board did attend. Number one, what is that appropriate pathway? And then second, a lot of this depends upon the particulars of the project, the credibility, financial credibility of the developer or whatever the project whoever the project owner is. And so I'd like to ask the same question about those credit enhancement agreements. Do those come back to the Board of Finance before they are finally executed by the city?
So two answers. So the first piece, well, let me answer the second question first, if that's okay. So again, one of the benefits of the new and improved TIF statute is the local control piece. So obviously, it's very important to make sure that this board is on board with potential TIF projects. So we have the ability to do that, right? So we can, the basic approval process is laid out in the master plan. And the BOF is not included in that. It should be. So the idea is you look at sort of overall policy pieces, but then you get into the nitty-gritty of the stuff that I'm not smart enough to understand, right? The bonding pieces that I rely so much with, Diane and her office on, and the financing. So the important piece is we have the ability, and we should get the Board of Finance involved in anything that we're doing through TIF, right? We haven't been to TIF because that same updated state statute language, it doesn't require a Board of Finance stop sort of along this journey. It's been a journey. And there are several sort of boards that I have to sort of check off, and I've been relying on our consultant for that. Obviously, we've been invited to you into at least one or two, but there hasn't been that sort of mandated approval from Board of Finance that's required to establish the master plan. Probably should be. So.
Is that because Bristol's Board of Finance perhaps has a different role and a more authoritative role than other municipalities?
I'm not sure, potentially. But frankly, I know the individual who wrote the language, so I could question him on that.
And then maybe one point, there's some of the particulars here that I'm interested in knowing about, but I could probably follow up with you later. For example, you have the consultant, and you all have suggested a cap of 10%, as you mentioned, of all taxable real property in the city of Bristol. So as of October 2017, that taxable real property was $3,229,000,000. So 10% would be $322,900,000. You've chosen less than half of that, $144.7 million, to be the cap for the downtown district TIF. So frankly, I'm happy to hear that. I don't think it should be 100%, but there are matters like that that I'm interested in knowing why that percentage, why there's a certain percentage of equity required of the developer. 10% equity is mandated, as well as the developer needs to own the property, or the value of the property can be put in as part of that equity. It needs to be, I think, added to the 10% equity investment. And then finally, I assume this also covers brownfields. As the head of the former Connecticut Brownfield Remediation Authority, I was surprised to read in the paper at one point in earlier administration that the city was looking at establishing its own brownfield TIF. And as you know, and certainly our controller knows, issuing bonds is very expensive, certainly also dealing with consultants, especially in the environmental remediation field, very expensive and very complicated and complex to determine whether their assessments of remediation costs are going to be accurate. But I do recall that Bristol was interested, and obviously we should be interested in economic development in some very large brownfields we have in the city. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the brownfields piece, 100%. So, boy, we could talk about brownfields all night, but we won't do that. But the TIF district itself includes Riverside Avenue, and it was important for me to make sure that downtown was always an area of interest, but Riverside specifically. Riverside is in need of improvements, right? And a lot of those improvements will involve brownfields, right? The Sessions Building has been a project that we will get done, but it's a brownfield, and we've been working on that for years. But frankly, there's brownfields all up and down that corridor. We applied for grant funding, actually, from the state for a sort of intensive study and look at the Riverside Avenue corridor and the brownfields on that corridor, because we know in order for that corridor to improve and to sort of spur good development there, brownfields is going to be in the front of, going to be involved with almost every project. So from a brownfields perspective, there is funding grant-wise at the state. I'll give the state a lot of credit for making those funds available, but it's competitive, right? And this gives us another opportunity to work on brownfields using another form of funding.
Is the 4.7 million that's in here targeted towards brownfield? That doesn't seem like enough, or is that just targeted towards generically what could...
The city improvement piece of this?
Yeah.
I don't believe there actually was a brown. So the idea, there wasn't a category. We had to sort of stay within the parameters of the language. But I know that brownfields development, whether it's demolition or new construction on a brownfield site, or even I believe abatement wouldn't be an allowable cost. It's a good idea. It's a good thought.
Because you had environmental remediation.
There you go.
Why.
Okay.
Yeah. Marie, do you have more?
No, good.
Okay, John.
I think Marie's hit a good part of it. The devil's in the details of this thing. The procedures, policies, governance, all of that.
Yeah.
I do think, however, that this is an arrow you need in your quiver, frankly. And if you take a look at some of the communities that have succeeded with TIF, and I understand the Vermont, although I would hazard to say that the folks in Burlington, Bennington, St. Johnsbury, and Brattleboro wouldn't agree with that report because they've used TIF. Burlington, for example, is a vibrant city now compared to what it was 20 years ago because of that. And again, I think it needs to be managed appropriately. I'm probably the only one in this room who has ridden on bicycle through Coralville, Iowa. But you might want to look it up. Small community, 10, 12,000. Probably would have closed had it not been for TIF, and they completely rebuilt not only its downtown but outside because of the Iowa TIF program. So it can be really a valuable tool for you to use in enhancing our ability to gain folks, companies, whatever, into this. Because we don't have a lake, we don't have a river running through here, we don't have a college, we don't have lots of things that are attractive to other areas, but we do have a community that is a great place to live, raise a family, and do business. And what we need to do, I think, is give you and the administration every tool available to make that happen.
As long as I have the support to do it right. Like, you're 100% right.
Not do it right, this board will come down on you.
It's not worth it.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's why we need this. I think I was telling Cheryl this last week or the week before. I come up with a lot of thoughts and ideas, and half of them don't make it past my desk. But I need the expertise of the policymakers, obviously our staff, unbelievable comptroller's office, to make these things work. So you're right, it's only as good as the deals that we're able to establish with them.
Other questions, comments? Oh, Orlando?
So I've got 5 questions that I've just penned while we're sitting here. I first want to start by saying thank you to our comptroller, our mayor, and our chairwoman for taking my recommendation to bring this in front of the board so we have some education. So thank you, Justin, of course, as well. I think it's important that we all understand what TIF is, and we can talk to whoever has questions somewhat educationally. So I asked you in a string of questions a couple weeks ago. One of the questions that I had were about bonds and notes and the issuance, and I was wondering if you had a chance to talk with Diane about that process.
We did a little bit. Can you touch on a little bit of that, Diane?
So the process would really work the same way we issue bonds and notes today. Obviously, they would be authorized, under the TIF program. There are, from what I understand, there are a couple of ways that you can do the TIF financing. You do TIF bonds, which would be what specifically paid for from the revenue that's generated, and they would be a TIF bond. But the other option that the city would want to look at would just do a regular GO bond, which would be less expensive. And then as the additional TIF revenues come in, you would just allocate those revenues to pay the bonds. So that, in my discussions with bond counsel, would probably be the way to go for that. I don't know if that answers your specific question on that, Arlen. Okay.
Thank you. So just in the outline that we have, how did you came up with that district? Why those specific perimeters?
The BOO, I call it BOO. So it's Census Tract 4061, I want to say. It's funny. So that's one of the first discussions that we had with the consultant was, okay, what's our TIF district? And I think that we wanted to look at the downtown area, but that's a lot of area. How do you map that out? So we had a couple of iterations. One involved our enterprise zone, which is an existing zone designated by the state of Connecticut that essentially encompasses much of downtown. But there were some areas that it includes that were highly residential, like single-family homes. It's not necessarily an appropriate area for a TIF district because you're looking for possibilities for larger developments. Also, that 10% rule, that's a state-mandated piece, by the way, so we have to stay under 10% of the total taxable real property. The enterprise zone put us way close. Actually, we were over the 10%, I believe. So we had to sort of pare it down. At the same time, we received opportunity zone status. So as we were having these discussions with our consultants, we applied for and received what's called an opportunity zone status for 4061, so for the BOOP, for Census Tract 4061. And it came together. The 4061 includes Riverside Avenue, which was important, and it doesn't include much of downtown, so it just kind of worked out that way.
What's the difference between an opportunity and enterprise zone?
Opportunity zone is something very new. It's a federal designation that it provides incentives to investors who are coming into an area, who are making large investments in development projects that will benefit the entire city. So it's something that we applied for. We were sort of limited by census tract, so we took 4061. Actually, it was part of several census tracts that we applied for. We won the designation for 4061. So opportunity zone is yet another incentive that we haven't even had the chance to talk about much for investors to come in and look at the area. Investors essentially receive federal tax privileges for their investments that they make here and other. So it's kind of lined up perfectly.
And just because there's development in a TIF district, does that mean that that developer actually gets the benefit of TIF, or will each project need to be addressed by whoever handles the CEA?
No, so the CEAs are going to be standalone, right? And that's what, so the scrutiny is going to be involved very heavily with CEA projects. They're going to be special projects. The project itself has to be $1 million in cost minimum. It has to be transformative for the entire district. And there's going to be sort of several layers of city, what's the word I'm looking for? So we're going to be looking at it from several different angles with several different groups. It starts with a TIF staffed group, right? So it includes our comptroller, of course, myself, our corporation counsel, our assessor, our tax collector. That's where these projects would start. And if they sort of make it through that process, the developer would be vetted, it would require all that documentation I think that we talked about. It would sort of work its way then through the different levels of policy to the BOF, obviously, ultimately to City Council. So those are sort of really special projects. The city projects are also special, but and they'll sort of go along that same process. So everyone else living within the district will not notice anything new. Again, there's no special tax associated with this at all. We're just carrying on as usual. Hopefully what residents will notice are like really cool developments down the street, right, that are hopefully improving their property values.
And lastly, I know Ron, John, and I have been beating around this idea of a strategic plan for a number of years now, and we started going down the path of putting together, I guess, the basic tenets of a strategic plan. Do we have a way to incorporate TIF into a strategic plan as it comes to fruition?
100%. Yeah, I mean, I think it should be. I'm no stranger to that strategic plan piece. So
The
I
mayor
would hope
already
it,
started that process.
there you go. So I would hope it would be included.
Okay, thank you.
Like, one last question. When you mentioned the $1 million minimum or the threshold, does that mean that a single residence would need to meet that $1 million threshold?
Yeah, they would need to meet the $1 million threshold, but they'd also need to meet other thresholds, right? So this program was never intended to help someone put a deck on their house, right? I mean, these are transformative projects, right? I'm talking about taking out some blighted, large residential building and building something new and beautiful in its place, right?
Or returning some quite historic structures that we have in this district very close to downtown that might in fact require as much as $1 million to put them back into some
There
kind
you
of
go.
play.
Yes, serious rehabs like that.
Thank you.
Any questions on this side?
Yeah, maybe. What's the difference between TIF, that you will take the increase in taxes and you will give it back, and tax incentive? If you say you have a program of 20 years,
Yeah.
why don't you give them incentive in taxes for 20 years for the developer?
For the CEA case? Yeah, it's a very good question. The difference is actually sort of twofold. But the main difference is we're limited on how long we can provide a tax abatement, right? The state literally limits us, believe it or not, to how long that we can provide a developer a tax abatement. So if a developer came in and let's say they have a 30-year financing, right? And their bank says that we love the project, it seems to work, we see a need in Bristol for this, but you have a gap there, and you have to demonstrate how you're going to close that gap for a 30-year period, or a 20-year period, let's use. We can't do a 20-year tax abatement right now. We've done 10 years as our most, to date. I think we'd go a couple years above that. It's new language. But we couldn't do a 20-year, right? So in that comparison, it does allow us to do a longer incentive period with the developer.
One of the things we talked about a lot was a clawback feature when we do the incentive. So what happens in one of these type projects if there's a failure?
So again, the devil's in the details. So that contract piece. So if we were to work with a private developer and there's going to be a contract, probably several contracts associated with the agreement, and I would absolutely, just the way we do our incentives, suggest that we look for a way to receive some of that incentive back if the project goes belly up. If someone starts a project that completely flips the switch and it's a different project 5 years from now than it was when it started, we need to protect ourselves in that situation. I agree.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Joe.
Does the payback incentive have to be the same for each project? It could be 20 years for one, 10 for another, depending on the public-private partnership that you...
No, it doesn't. So you could incentivize deals based on the policymakers could incentivize deals based on the quality of the deal, right? The quality of the end product, we'll say.
Thank you.
Ron, were you leaning forward?
I just had a thought. Is it transformative enough to move City Hall from here to 10 Main Street and then use this property?
That's for others to decide.
Well,
I'll say one thing, right? So if, in the event policymakers make a determination on that, and this building becomes available for private use, 100%.
Any other comments, questions, concerns?
One more.
Okay.
So, the TIF district, the food outline that you currently have, is it permanent, or does it have to be contiguous? Can you break it up, and as long as it's under the 10%, can you move a part of it to another area of town that you see a need for development?
I think that it's tricky, we can add to it, right? So, to Marie's point, we're well under that 10% limit. We cannot include within TIF districts 10% or above of the city's total sort of value, real property value. we have a nice cushion there, so we can include other areas. To my point, I think I made 5 years from now, who knows, some area of the city is perfectly set up for a nice development, but TIF would really, make that development possible. We can add to it. Can it change? I believe it can, but again, we go through this process again, which is okay. But if we find that there's a certain area within the existing TIF district, within the boot, that we're just not getting any play, right? I think that we can manipulate it. We'll just have to go through this process again.
Thank you very much, Josh. Then if anybody has any other questions that pop to them, please direct those to Diane and we'll get them to Justin. Thank you very much.
Agenda item 7, new business. And
You had a couple items you wanted to bring up.
if the Board of Finance will indulge me for about 10 more minutes, I do have 2 items I just wanted to bring up. The first one, we're in the process of closing the fiscal year. Robin and the accounting staff have been working diligently to close purchase orders and get all the expenditures in. I know the Board of Ed, now that they have their final numbers, that definitely helps. And we're also in the process of, finalizing our 60-day collections, getting all the accrued revenues in, and all of the other accruals that we need to get in. I just wanted to follow up to something that when we talked about at the joint board. As you know, there have been some revenues that we have been exceeding our estimates on, particularly our tax revenues, our building permit fees, and our investment income. But conversely, on the state revenue side, we have had some deficits there that we've had to, or shortages, primarily because of the state that we've had to make up for. So in total, the state revenues were roughly around $3.4 million short. And again, that was the motor vehicle tax that we did not get the revenue for, the municipal revenue sharing we did not get for. The total of those two were almost $3 million. We did have a holdback on the ECS grant of $250,000 back in the fall that the governor held back on, and then we did have the $501,000. So all that told, we will have a shortage on the revenue side, which we have anticipated. One of the things that I don't talk about too much when I do the joint board is on the expenditure side, because unless there's something that is going to be out of the norm, particularly as an example, snow removal, we pretty much won't know where we will end the year until we get to this point and everything is closed out. So my point is that we are not going to end the year with a $3.4 million deficit. I think this year it will be a very close. We will probably pretty much break even by the time we take our actual revenues, which will include all the surpluses and the deficits on the state revenues, and then subtract our expenditures out of that. So I just wanted to just bring that up and just say that it will be a very tight year when we look at the end of the year surplus, once we take the revenues and the expenditures in account. But I do think that our fund balance will still be in a very good position. The Board of Finance did last year set aside $2 million to help offset the state revenues. So we had anticipated the reduction in the state revenue. So I just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit more at this meeting. So if anybody has any questions on that, I'll definitely get you more information or answer the questions. So
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead. No, I'm good. She and I talked about it.
Just a comment, because this has been a difficult year
yes.
for everybody, I think. And just give yourself a pat on the back, you and your staff, the administration, for managing our way through this thing. If you wind up with a small deficit, you get an ovation from me, frankly, because...
There will be a small one probably, but just it's not going to be significant.
That would be just fine. A hell of a lot better than what we expected.
But then again, we putting aside money for knowing that we'd have tax shortfalls was very, good vision for this board, and I want to commend you all for letting us do that when we did. Don't forget, we set up the sinking fund. We put money into economic development for grant money, and so there were a lot of things we were able to accomplish with that. But I have to echo that great job to Diane and her staff, Robin, Judy, thank you.
And on that note, I guess this segues well into we're working really hard to get this done because we will be doing a bond issue in October. So we are right now working on the official statement, trying to determine the amount we are going to borrow. And, when we go to the rating agencies, we want to give them good news and how we were able to manage all of the challenges that we had this year. So I think, all in all, I think everybody did a very good job this year doing that. So what I handed out, I just wanted to let you know that in trying to determine the amount that we are going to finance this October, I know I talked about it during the budget process, both at the capital budget meetings and at the Board of Finance meetings. We currently have $11.8 million in short-term notes that come due in October, and then we also have another $3.8 million in taxable notes. The $11.8 million is tax exempt, and we have $3.8 in taxable. We spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks, particularly last week and again yesterday, and working with bond counsel to try to come up with what we need to borrow. So all in all, I'm just going to go through this chart that I handed out. Right now we're looking at borrowing $30 million in tax-exempt long-term 20-year general obligation bonds, and then $8 million in 20-year taxable 20-year bonds. The taxable piece of it, 3.8 of that is for the purchase of the Center Square property that we could not do on a tax-exempt basis. And then there's approximately $4 million in some projects that probably should have been bonded sooner. They weren't, so our time period has expired on that to do tax-exempt, so we have to do those as taxable. I did have our financial advisor, Phoenix Advisors, they do this all the time, give me a number of different scenarios on how we can finance this and have the least impact on next year's budget. I do know when I did present the debt service budget and at the capital budget, I said we will have an increase in debt service next year. Wasn't sure exactly what it would be, but I said it will probably be around $800 to $1 million. I had them kind of work around those parameters, knowing that we had the $30 million and the $8 million that we had to issue. And the scenario that I think is the most that fits with the needs of the community and the budget is issuing $30 million and the $8 million, and there's different rules on how you structure the principal payments. So what you have before you is showing that next year the debt service budget would go up approximately $1,197,000. And again, these are estimates. We won't know the actual interest rate that we get until we do the bond issue and we get the competitive bids. And the $30 million may change. I know when we sat down with bond counsel yesterday, there might be a couple of projects that we could probably put off and not bond right away. So this, I think, would probably be worst case of what we borrow. That being said, next year it will go up $1.197 million, roughly. That's a mill increase of about 0.31 based on the current grant list, and that's a tax increase of about 0.84%. So I know some members, I know Orlando and I had some discussion kind of going out, the impact on some outer year, the impact. Looking at this, you can see just this one bond issue will have a 0.84% tax increase, and then going out the following year, it goes up again about $200,000, and it's a 0.15% tax increase. So just this issue alone, I just wanted to lay out for you what the impact would be on the current debt service, and adding this almost $40 million to it will do to the budget. And I also gave it to you in a graph form as well, so you can kind of see that, particularly in years 2022 and 2023, we have a significant decrease in debt service. So at that point, we could start issuing some of the other projects, some of the other debt that we have in our long-range plan, and even some of the authorized unissued that we are not yet ready to issue. That number seems kind of daunting. It's about $112 million, but when you go through it, it whittles down to just under 60. So it's not that bad.
Still considerable.
It is considerable, but...
Questions on this?
What about the TIF bond that Justin referenced, that still requires action by the city, but what do you expect to be your request on that?
I don't have an idea of that for right now.
It also...
None of that is incorporated in here.
The only figures she really could do is what we know has incurred and what has been approved. It also does not include funds for the boulevard, which were around $20 million. And then, of course, the needs that are coming forward in the next capital improvement budget. Any talk of moving City Hall, TIF, those are not in this. So it's one of the things is to really for us to consider is our capacity to debt and what that impact will be moving forward.
Just to give you an idea too, I know one of the ratios that the rating agencies look at is debt service as a percent of budget. And I think Bristol's in a very good position, even adding this debt on in fiscal 2020 and using the current budget. Actually, I think it's a 2.5% increase. Using the current budget and just assuming a slight increase, the city would still be around 5% of debt service as a percent of budget. So, that is one ratio that you can kind of look at as a good measure.
Comments, questions? Thank you for sharing that.
So the timeline would be, we would probably go to the rating agency. I think right now we're scheduled for October 1st, and it will issue the bonds the following week.
Very good. Thank you. Any other new business?
Agenda item 9, old business. I'm sorry, agenda 8.
John, you have your finger up.
Yes, it's a question on the audit of the youth commission. Is that progressing or?
Yeah. So we did have our first initial meeting. We did have our first initial meeting with the auditors and youth services, and they are right now in the process of developing their plan and setting up interviews.
Thank you.
Orlando, did you have your, Marie did.
I'm waiting for the next agenda item.
Okay, then Orlando.
So, old business. This morning I read in the newspaper that Bristol and supervisory unions agree on a 4-year contract, so congratulations, I'm glad that we're moving forward. But the piece that interested me, and this has been a subject of this board as well, is the concern of defined contribution versus defined benefits and the changes in the pension and the retirement. And I see that we're addressing that with health care and benefits as part of the discussion. So congratulations and thank you for moving forward on that. And I think it's just going to benefit our city and our employees as we go forward.
Marie?
So this comes under any other matter to come before said meeting.
Any other old business? Okay.
Agenda item 9, any other matters to come before said meeting?
Marie?
Thank you. I wasn't quite sure how to bring this up, and I didn't want to bring it up during the discussion on tax-incremental financing and Justin's presentation. I just have a couple of questions as a new member of the Board of Finance with respect to the role of the Board of Finance. And certainly, I did benefit from meeting with the controller, and I'm looking for my little blue notebook that I bring each time. I do have a copy of the ordinances and other matters that define the board's ethics, its conflict of interest, its members, its alternates, its responsibilities, its duties, its authority. And so I guess I'm a little perplexed at how a Bristol Development Authority could in fact engage in putting together such a significant study using a very important and crucial tool that this city should definitely have. And I'm not questioning the TIF tool in that toolbox for our economic development folks and our volunteer leaders on the BDA. But I think I need to understand what exactly we do as a Board of Finance in helping educate ourselves, educate the public, and possibly bring some other discussions to different City Hall departments. I'm especially concerned because when I do go to pick up the newspaper and read that, and you may have been misidentified as the chairwoman of the Board of Finance at a public hearing where I'm sure you can, as we all can, offer testimony as private citizens, the newspaper article came across that your comments were the position of the Board of Finance. So in my diligence as a new member, I went back and tried to do my homework and went back through minutes of meetings and agendas of meetings and found the March meeting at which a couple of Board of Finance members were invited to meet with the BDA. They did and learned a little bit about TIF, but I could find nothing else where the Board of Finance itself had actually talked about TIF or had a conversation or put together an educational session. So I'd like to hear other people's opinions of this, but I'm used to having policy boards actually dedicate a small portion of the agenda, maybe not every month, but to education, bringing up policy topics that are not political topics. They are genuine policy, very broad issues that require that we hear from experts, and then we hear and listen to each other, and we benefit from each other's experience.
Let me stop you with one point right now, because when I gave testimony, I did not get up and identify myself as the chairwoman of the Board of Finance. I am a resident of the city, and I am entitled in any public session to give my viewpoints of my research. So I basically have that right, just as any member here does, and I don't expect to be challenged for doing that. I don't write the articles in the paper. I was not interviewed for the article in the paper. I simply gave my testimony based on reading what Justin had put forward, what other studies I've read, and again, I reiterate that is my right as a citizen. So I do not appreciate the challenge to that God-given right.
I would like minutes to record that I did not challenge the chairwoman of the Board of Finance. I'm asking a series of questions with regard to the protocol, the procedure, and the behavior expected of members of the Board of Finance. I certainly understood that and don't believe everything I read in the paper, and I did reference that in my remarks. I want to be sure that the minutes for this meeting do reflect that I'm bringing these questions up and these observations up from my experience, which does include, unfortunately, the fact that there are times when you speak up and you are mischaracterized or mistitled or mislabeled. But to the point then, what are we going to do with the TIF discussion? What is the role of this Board of Finance? What should we expect next month? Why do I need to separately go find the report when generally there's usually a library of documents that is provided to a board such as this that we can quickly go to find those things that are appropriate for our financial responsibility for this city. So is this sort of a process improvement that might come forward for us as a Board of Finance, and also what should we expect over the next month?
Well, first of all, what guides us and what guides our functions is what the Charter has empowered us to do, first and foremost, okay? And there are things that the Economic Development Authority can do, there are things the Mayor's Office can do, and so we're charged with primarily, if you read the Charter, the budget and appropriation of debt and items along those lines. I do expect that at some point this would come. I feel our role with TIF will come down to what is an appropriate debt structure when it comes time to issuing bonds. Only the Board of Finance has the authority to issue debt.
That's right.
And that is our function. Outside of, it's a great request, and you know, as members pop up and say we could use information on that, we act, okay? But we don't have, you know, a crystal ball to say, oh, well, we should bring this month. We do our best, okay? So in this case, more information. But when you take on a role, as great as the Board of Finance, I do think you do have an obligation to stay current with what other departments are doing, and just don't rely on this information for all your knowledge. And if you have a particular question, bubble it up so that the information can be provided for you. John, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, Marie, you hit on something that perhaps has been lacking, not in recent years, but I've been involved with the Board of Finance for a long, long time. And if you read the charter, we violate the charter
All the time.
all the time, because we don't just vote whether or not the city can afford something, we vote whether we think it's a good thing. Case in point was the turf fields. Some people weren't in favor because it didn't have a certain base. Well, that's not our job to say this base or that base. Our job is whether, if you read the charter, is to whether the city can afford to do that or whether the city cannot afford to do that. Nothing's going to change that because we're all individual members, but it strikes me that, first of all, we should have a policy manual. I've talked about this before, because we have policies, but they're not in one place. You don't have a copy of the 11 to 15%, or you don't. No one does. I guess you do, but we don't. But we adopt certain things that perhaps ought to be written down, and we have a manual, and every once in a while we review it, and sometimes we change that policy, sometimes we don't. Having an educational session, I mean, this was great, except a tip explanation, something of that magnitude can't be done in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. That needs to be done in an hour and a half to allow for the interaction of this group and whomever, and a whole host of other things that we need to get our arms around. Got our arms around Board of Education and working with them, and they work with us, and look at the positive things that have resulted from that. But that wouldn't have happened unless there was a crisis, and we're now at the point, I think, where we begin to avoid crises and begin to plan.
Right.
So as we do a strategic plan, that includes Board of Finance folks. I mean, this whole thing, I think, needs to be revisited. Not that we change the charter, because the charter, that section of the charter has been in place since 1930-something, when Rockwell and Page said, yeah, we'll co-sign the notes, but you will do this. And we've done it. But back when I first became involved, it was, we're not going to air condition that school, because if you want to air condition it, you'll never get it approved. I mean, those kinds of things. That's never going to go away, but there are different ways of operating, I think, and we should take time at every meeting to educate ourselves and learn about different things, and I wholeheartedly support that process.
Right, and the only way we're going to know what people want to be educated on is if they bubble a topic up. I don't have a crystal ball to read your mind on what you might have questions on, or Ron, or anybody else, okay? And I am one of 9. Okay? If you've got suggestions or there's issues you want to cover, we work our best to work those into the meeting.
I mean, none of us have a corner on the main brain market, I don't think.
Well, if you'd allow me to, then I would like to maybe spend a few minutes with our controller, who I understand is a leader in a national association, and perhaps maybe take a look at a couple of key items that she and the department feel, maybe the mayor and others might feel are important topics that we might be facing over this next year, just so that they don't come up in crisis. So, for example, TIF, in dealing with developers, you never want to do that in a crisis. And you never want to do that when you're poor. Right? You want to do that when people are investing in your city, and there are jobs, and there is an increase in property tax values. So I'd be willing to do that if you thought that was appropriate.
Never one to hold people back, but I would prefer that we meet first, if you don't mind, and we can talk about that and absolutely create that open path.
Thank you.
Other questions, concerns? Okay.
One final comment. And I neglected to say a great job on the part of Sue and her staff on taking it from $1 million something down to $4 something. Well done.
Thank you.
We will expect nothing less.
Of course.
That's right. She already put in a caveat that they aren't going to be able to do it again. Okay, then could we have a motion to adjourn if there's nothing else? I guess we're not moving. Okay. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.